Welcome back, baseball fans, to another edition of the Prep Baseball Report of North Carolina podcast. I'm Brandon Hall, the Mid-Atlantic Regional Director of Scouting, and he's Matt Payne, our North Carolina Director of Scouting. Ton of information ready to roll out this week, Matt. We've seen a ton of players over the last really month. Continue to educate those guys. But beyond that, it's rankings week. And when rankings week happens, our website gets flooded, and that's a good thing. How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. It is ranking season and busy few weeks ahead.
So for us, rankings week, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You know, we love the interest. We love being able to talk about prospects. We love being able to go through and cut guys up and dice them up. But I think across the world, people put too much emphasis on who's number 2 and who's number 5 and who's number 20 and who's number 30. Whereas, you know, when we're building this stuff out, you know, I'll let you talk. How do you go about building out the rankings? And again, we're going to release the 2024s on Wednesday, and have a little bit of a campaign in behind them, and the 2025s are coming next week. But as you're diving into this list and all these players we saw this summer, what's your process to get them into some sort of order?
Yeah, obviously everybody has a number beside their name, and it's debatable always, but it's not so much that number. I think we've talked about it before. You kind of put guys together, and guys are grouped with very similar players that have similar grades on them, and you can kind of take those groups of guys and organize them anyway, and make an argument for them to be right, and just trying to put them together with guys we've seen and guys that have been to events, and the guys have tools, and some guys perform in games, and getting that balance of workout guys versus game guys versus guys that have shown they can do both.
And one of the questions we get a lot is, obviously we have preferential treatment. If they come to a PBR event, they have to be ranked. If they come to a PBR event, they'll be ranked ahead of everybody else that hasn't been to a PBR event. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. If we did it that way, the list would look a whole lot different, I'm sure.
Yeah, the goal is to be right, and it's a unique situation that we're in, because pro scouts and college coaches do look at our work. Whereas when you were at App State and you had your recruiting board, you probably had them in an order. You probably had rankings without saying these are our rankings. They were in some sort of order, in some sort of list, but nobody else outside of your office saw that. So you guys would debate it in your office. When we turn this thing loose to the world, we hear from college coaches, we hear from pro scouts, we hear from national cross checkers, we hear from high school coaches, we hear from moms and dads, we hear from players themselves. And honestly, a lot of the feedback is pretty positive in terms of, we know you guys are working. I don't agree with everything, but we appreciate the list. Occasionally we get the outlier of, you guys are freaking lost your mind and you don't have any idea what you're talking about. But it's something that we take pride in, because we're being evaluated by it, so to speak. This is like a midterm or a final for us as we're posting these names, letting everybody see what we think.
Yeah, definitely. And it's, there's a lot of projection that goes with it. And doing them, you got to take into consideration the kid that's, physically mature now and may not have a lot of growth left, versus the guy whose numbers may be a tick shy of some other guys, but you like the projection and you can tell he's still baby face, and the body's got a lot of growth. And it's definitely a balance of what they are now versus what they'll be, next March and next July come draft time, versus what they'll be 2 years into their college career.
So when we're doing this, we do take into account their stats. And when we say stats, what we're talking about are tool markers: velocity, movement, exit velocity, launch angle, distance off the bat, arm strength, pop times. We take into account all of that, right?
Yeah. I mean, you have to take in the metrics.
Is that are there lines in the sand? Are there areas where you say, Matt has a higher exit velocity than John, so Matt's going to be ranked higher than John?
No, that's you can't just draw that line there. We do the events, and a lot of times you'll see a kid with a high exit velocity, and you go back and look, and his hardest ball was, a ground ball he beat straight into the ground in front of home plate, versus a guy who consistently hit balls on the barrel, and the top number may be lower, but you're evaluating the swing and things like that as well, not just the number.
And so on top of that, we've got players that come to events, they get these stats, these tool markers for us. And then they come to events like our border battle, our top prospect games, our future games this fall, our unsigned senior games, our top underclass games, and we get to see gameplay on top of it. On top of that, between you, me, and a couple of other guys, we saw over 350 high school games. On top of that, we're at some tournament games. We're getting feedback from our guys in Atlanta and in Virginia, and they're watching guys playing games. So how do we mesh gameplay versus physical tools and trying to not only put a current grade on them, but then talk about what that could do to a future grade?
I mean, obviously, you have to be a good player. You have to be able to play the game, and um, I think the game weighs more, but at the same time, we've all shown up and seen the kid who's undersized and not very strong play really well in game or in a tournament, but because of his physical abilities, he's going to be very limited on what he can do in the future. So it's not just hits or a good day or good weekend, and it's absolutely not just a fastball or exit velocity either.
One of the other questions we get is on the other type of stat, the actual in-game stat. Johnny hit 430. How in the world is he ranked behind a guy that in his own conference only hit 280? How do when we're looking at that, are you ever even considering some of the stats that are out there that we do see, or is that just it's something that kind of falls to the wayside based on the way that development's going to happen?
I think some matter. Some's kind of like you play in the golf scramble. The team with the best pencil wins a lot of times, and I think that can be true to who's scoring these high school games too, as far as hits. But it's hard to argue strikeouts. It's
Yep.
hard to argue walks. It's hard to argue home runs and extra base hits. Those are a lot harder to argue than a batting average or an ERA and things like that.
And one of the things that we heard last year, and one of the rankings that we put out towards the end of the year, is we had a young man as a right-hander who would bump 96. Was working anywhere from 90 to 94 and consistently bumping six. He spun a breaking ball pretty well, but it was everywhere. I mean, he sprayed it everywhere. And what's funny on our end, and we share some of these things, is we got an email going, how do you have this guy ranked when he can't even pitch for his high school team because he's spraying the ball everywhere? And on the very next end is, how do you have this guy ranked where he is when he's touching 96? He's throwing it. He's got the best fastball in the state. How is he not higher? And I think that's the duality, and that those two emails speak to a lot of the conversations that you and I have, with other scouts. This isn't just you in a dark room. This is a collaborative, kind of report. Now, your name, being the state director, is on this report at the end of the day, but that collaboration, and again, it goes back to kind of tiering players and seeing how they're grouped more so than seeing exactly where they're ranked.
Absolutely. Yeah, like you said, we talk to the scouts all the time, and none of us can be everywhere to see every outing or every performance, but through those conversations, you get a feel of if you saw that kid on one of his better days or one of his worst days, and uh, it is hard to ignore a 96-mile-an-hour fastball, but it's also hard to ignore a ton of walks and a guy that if you put him in the ACC wouldn't pitch, or threw him in A ball, he would have trouble having success there versus maybe the guy that's 92 to 94 and can has some pitchability and just a more polished product currently versus you know somebody else.
And that's where we see even in the draft. You see these, the NFL draft, the NBA draft, the Major League Baseball draft. You see the expert that's on TV who's saying, okay, here's the next best prospect. Mel Kiper's next best on the board. And then that dude's on the board for like 31 picks because it can be individualistic. What you see and what you like and what you guys develop well may be different than what 26 other clubs do. And that's why lists can be different and can be reordered. And it's, if you get a chance to hang out with pro scouts at high school games or at events, they're really only dialed in on one or two players per game. There's certain teams and certain events, maybe they're having to watch a little bit more, but most high school games, they're there to see one player, and so they're kind of dialed in when he's on defense just to make sure they're watching. They're really dialed in when he's hitting, but then the rest of the time they're off talking. Those conversations are just, really fun to be around, because they do get into Hey, what do you think of this guy? What do you think of this guy? And it's not just the current crop. It's guys that are now in the minors. It's guys that were, here's what I had on him 3 years ago, and now here's what he's doing. I didn't see it coming, or, man, I think there's more in there. I just hope he gets it figured out. Those are things that we kind of enjoy being around. Those are things that you and I enjoy talking about that I don't think the average baseball fan necessarily gets to see. That goes into the rankings, yes, but just in terms of how we cut players up on a daily basis, not just the week of the rankings.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned it before, but you'll see you get to the draft and there'll be a guy that we have ranked, 15th or 30th get drafted, and you say, well, how'd you have all these other kids ahead of him? Well, a lot of it depends on their price, and scouts put a dollar figure on a certain tool or a certain ability, and colleges do it to an extent as well. But if a guy makes himself signable, he'll go up some boards versus a guy who may be a better overall player with more tools, but his numbers are a lot higher.
And as we get into we're going to start talking about players here in a minute, but let's even take it further to a college level. If you look back at our rankings over the last 5 years of the classes that have gone on, there's kind of, you can start to see where the tiers are based on where some of the commitments are and based on who was a pro prospect and who wasn't. And you can start kind of drawing some lines in those rankings. But inevitably, there's going to be a player 4, 5, 10, 15 spots outside that tier that played a tier up and played really well, or turned himself into a pro prospect from a tier 3. We used to talk about finding fits at Charlotte, finding guys that really fit and could communicate with us. And we're going to, from the day one, hit the ground running in terms of their development. And day one, really taking to what we were trying to do in the weight room and what we were trying to do with our strength conditioning and our nutrition plan, understanding the pressure it's going to be put on you academically, because as soon as one of those things falls apart, your other development areas fall apart. And so we really wanted those guys to be, highly into that understanding what the development phase was going to be. And so we had some undersized guys get prospect potential because of the way they developed. And I think we see that even in the board in the 24 class. You can start seeing now some of the commitments are really starting to roll in. You can see a guy that maybe we've mistiered a little bit based on his commitment. Are we right? Are we wrong? I don't know that we're right or wrong, or you could even do that. But I think it's interesting to see sometimes players find a fit, and then we're pulling for them when they get to that school. Regardless of where we have them ranked. I've never said, man, we had that guy at X, and he's committed here. I hope he doesn't play well, so we're wrong. We're pulling for those dudes. I'm wanting that guy to go show everybody how fickle the rankings can be and how much player development plays into it. And when you're looking at the future and trying to grade those guys out in the future, what is it you're looking for that says, okay, his future grade has a chance to go and do this when we don't have a developmental department?
And you just got to look at the natural athleticism. If there's athleticism, then they can obviously get better. And uh, you know, putting together a recruiting class, usually each class you got to have a defensive catcher, a defensive shortstop, and a defensive center fielder. And a lot of times, you'll see commitments, and the school may have just needed a guy that can catch the ball in the middle of the field and has enough arm to play on the left side. And I think when you get away from a kid that can play on the left side of the infield, then he probably goes down a little bit. A catcher who is rough defensively will go down a little bit. An outfielder that hits right-handed and can't play in center will go down a little bit. And I think you kind of you know do it there a little bit, and then obviously there's guys that get a lot better, and you know commit maybe above where we have them ranked, and you're obviously happy for those guys because it shows that they've improved their game.
Absolutely. Let's stay with some of the commitments here. And as you've gone through this list, you've sorted this list, you've gone back through this list, you double checked it, triple checked it, and you see, because a lot of what we do is blind. When we're doing the initial rankings, it's based on kind of the tier we're putting on the player, the grade we put on the player, and some of the confidence levels that we have in that grade. How many times we've seen that player? Did we see him on his best day? Did we see him on his worst day? How does that work? But then we add back in their commitments, and you start seeing where some of these guys are going, and some of the gaps and spacing, and where commitments there's a lack of commitments in this class. How do you think the transfer portal has affected the 24 class? And what are you noticing colleges are doing with their process compared to pre-COVID and even 3 years ago when the transfer portal wasn't a thing?
I think for this 24 class has probably been the most difficult to rank since we've been doing it. And, some of the guys on the list we saw when they were babies,
Yep.
uh, and then COVID hit and, everybody's recruiting off video and college coaches aren't out. So you see commitments, some players that have, jumped up tremendously up our board. They weren't able to be seen at a younger age because people weren't out as much. And then, you throw in the transfer portal that got through on this class. And I think that's why you see a wide range of commitments throughout the board. And there's been, a lot of change, especially when you get outside the top 50 in this class. Just this class has dealt with so much from COVID to the transfer portal, the new rules. And it's been one of the more interesting classes to deal with.
Yeah, watching what some of the programs are bringing in the 23 class, now that they're completing that 23 class, you're seeing they're allowed to be at 40 on their roster, which is higher than what they had thought they were going to be allowed to be at. So that's the first thing. 35 was kind of the number everybody was thinking they were going to be at. The NCAA came back and said, hey, we're going to let you carry 40, which I think is a good thing. I think that number allows you to practice at a higher level throughout the year. Then the next thing was, are they still recruiting high school guys? Are they still recruiting junior college guys? Or are they just strictly in the portal? And you're seeing the portal affect some of the numbers. And so it's not affecting the overall number of players that are committed. It's affecting where that line is for Division I, Division II, JUCO. And you're seeing more and more players, I think, opt or be pushed towards maybe a junior college lifestyle, which isn't a bad thing. And we're seeing, some of the junior colleges in the areas, I think, really take advantage of that, and some of their developmental systems allowing those coaches to get a second evaluation on them over the next 2 years. And so I'm really interested to see, typically in North Carolina, we're between 425 and 475 commits every year, with more than half of those coming after December of the senior year. So as many commitments as we have on the board right now, we're still not even halfway to what we're going to see. In terms of Division I commitments, we're probably starting to roll into that 80 to 90% range of the Division I's being in that area of being done with high school. And so that's one area I'm interested to really follow with this class, because, I'm looking through a little bit. When we get to, number 60, there's a little bit of a gap in some of the commitments. And then as we really get to about 125, it starts to thin out. Now, you still see some Division I guys in there. You still see some junior college guys in there. You start to see some Division II guys in there. But it starts to thin out a little bit in terms of where those colleges are at and where these guys are committed. And again, we still got a long, long way to go with this class. So in terms of following commitments with this class, what are you excited to watch here over the next, 6 months?
Like you talked about those gaps in commitments. There's a lot of guys that we have, they have, some Division I tools in there, or how we've graded them out. And like you mentioned, it may just not fit in some rosters right now. So to me, it'll be interesting to see where a lot of those guys end up. And, if they do decide to go junior college, do they end up at a Division I down the road, or do they go become a Division II All-American?
Yeah.
And like you said, there's a ton left to do with this class. And, the fall will be big, the winter will be big, and it'll be really interesting to see where they're at. I think when we do the March update, or whenever it is, and see how much change between now and then.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the college process now. You put your recruiting coordinator hat back on. You get to this point in the summer, and typically you're feeling pretty good about where your class is at, right? You're on the phone. You're probably telling commits, hey, we're in a holding pattern. We got to just kind of make sure on the roster. You're probably holding back a couple junior college spots. More than likely, you're probably holding back some portal spots moving forward with this class. And then fall practice hits. And then you watch the guys that you had incoming. Then you watch the guys that are supposed to have gotten better over the summer. And then you watch, some injury issues take place. And what happens about halfway through that fall? Just about all the way across the country, what does every recruiting coordinator get that itch and start to think about?
They start seeing who's still available, and
Yep.
as uh as happens seems to happen every year in North Carolina. There's 1 to 3 arms that either pop up out of nowhere or make a tremendous jump, and their recruiting process gets really busy in a hurry.
Well, and as good as evaluators are, as good as you are an evaluator, and I am as an evaluator, we would bring guys in on classes, and inevitably you get about halfway through the fall, and you'd have a freshman that couldn't get anybody out, and you had projected him as maybe he's a bullpen piece, maybe he's a setup guy, closer type, eventually a starter, and now you're looking at the guy going, I don't know if he's ever going to throw an inning for us because he can't get anybody out, and so now we have a need. We thought this guy may be a starter in 2 years. We have a need, and so now I'm back on the phone. I'm trying to find best available arm. Maybe we had a catcher and we knew he was a light hitting catcher, but we really liked his arm and his defense. And then we saw how light hitting meant. And you're going, I really don't want that guy in the lineup. We got to have 9 guys have a chance to put pressure on guys. And so while it wasn't a miss, it really doesn't design itself to put your program in a regional, in position for championships. That's a good backup piece, but we're not going to count on that guy to ever start for us. I got to go find a starting catcher now. So that's the next rush in the recruiting class for the 24s. Is that kind of that mid-fall, oh my gosh, what have we done? I got to go find a guy. That's the one that's coming up next for them. And then the final piece at the higher levels is the draft. And we all, whether it's a high school guy or whether it's a junior on our roster, ideally guys keep getting better. And we're looking at it going, oh my gosh, that guy may not show up on campus or he may not be here next year. And now there's another rush on players. And, so for the 24 class, keep getting better. There are going to be opportunities. There's going to be eyes on you. At the higher level, it starts to funnel a little bit, in terms of, there may be some JUCOs and D3s and D2s. As you start to look at the really power fives, it may be only 1 or 2 slots, but there are going to be opportunities. Keep putting yourself out there. Matt, let's turn to the rankings. And the big news in the 2024 rankings is we have a new number 1. You want to introduce him and talk about our new number 1 prospect in the 2024 class?
Yeah, I believe it's the first time since the initial release that we have a new number 1, and it's Perry Hargett, Metrolina Christian, North Carolina commit, athletic, plays short, plays center, went to East Coast Pro, really toolsy, quickness and strength in there, and he's made the jump to number 1 in the North Carolina class.
Yeah, he was at our pro case, really athletic. I think I don't know how much when we're looking at this and trying to figure out what do we do with our grades. I don't know that his grade made a significant jump. I don't know that Anderson Nance or Truett Manuel took a significant hit. I think it was just kind of a culmination of some of the things that we had on Perry got ironed out. We saw the bat play. We saw the bat play a little bit more consistently because we saw more at bats. It wasn't like he changed anything. We just saw more at bats. And where the jump for him came was we got to know him better because we saw more of him versus, Anderson Nance didn't go backwards. Truett Manuel didn't go backwards. Their grades didn't change if I'm reading our charts right. It was really just, Perry Hargett, we saw more of him. The grades were similar. And we feel like the projection on him and what guys are looking for, it grades out tools-wise just slightly above those 2 guys. Talk a little bit about Anderson and Truett, obviously sliding from 1 and 2 to 2 and 3, but was it really a slide?
No, it wasn't a slide. I don't think either of those guys have done anything to fall. It's just sometimes how the tools lay out a little bit, and you still like both those guys and the years they had last year, and excited to see if they have any jumps headed into next spring.
As we slide down, we're going to stay inside the top 12 here. We had 2 high risers that are inside the top 12. Moving up from number 39 to number 9, a Texas commit catcher, Ryan Schwartz. And it's saying that on a chart as he was at Combine last year. Is he at Pro 5 this year?
I believe he's still at Combine.
At Combine, okay.
A typo there.
as we're live. So Ryan Schwartz, Combine catcher, committed to Texas. slots up 30 slots. What was it with Ryan that because obviously there's a grade change there, and his grade had to take a jump ahead of some of the prospects that were ahead of him prior.
Just the tools. That's a name we'd heard in the past and seen some tools, and then he goes out this summer and he's the guy everyone's talking about, and kind of matched the game performance a little bit with some of the tools he'd shown in the past, and just became more polished.
Yeah, he was a guy we actually was on our list to go to future games last year. It wasn't like the some of the tools came out of nowhere. We had seen him and he had reclassed. So he's a little bit older for this class too, reclassing down into the 24 class, making the change to Combine Academy. And the body has taken. I mean, it's a very mature body, and he is physical. You look at him where he was a year ago, you look at him where he is now, and that time at Combine and what they do. The time those guys have it to really get in the weight room and be really cognizant of their nutrition, I think really paid off for him. The arm was always there. The feet have gotten better. The arms, the carry was good, but now the exchange times between, the pop to release, significantly improved. The biggest question on him, and is there room on him to continue to move up, will be the bat. And how does the bat play? In BP, it's electric. I mean, there's some juice in there. Haven't seen that quite play out games consistently, and all sorts of reasons for that. But I think pro scouts are going to be in there this fall, this spring, kind of really eyeing Combine and Ryan to see how the hit tool continues to progress. And obviously, catchers are a high risk draft, but we saw the Royals take one at number 7 or number 9 overall in this past year's draft. Someone similar to Ryan, big time arm, good athlete. They think they can develop the hit tool, and they popped him in the first round. So, we'll see where that helium and that goes for him. And then the other one I wanted you to talk about was Cameron Bagwell, right-handed pitcher from South Meck, committed to UNC Wilmington. Somebody we've known since he was in 8th grade.
Yeah, he when the class started, he was up there pretty high, and went to junior futures with us, and battled some injuries, and the injuries were the main reason for him falling back a little bit in the class. And saw him this summer back healthy. Breaking ball's gotten better, and goes to East Coast Pro, commits to UNC Wilmington, and looks to be headed in the right direction right now.
He had a really good state games, and he is a physical dude on the bump, and he threw strikes. Coming off the injury, he threw strikes. I think we saw either a 90, a 91, maybe a 92. The breaking ball was good enough, but it's the physicality you're kind of betting on, and he'll be an interesting follow because his dad's physical too. His brother played Division I baseball, wasn't quite as physical as Cameron is, but there's athleticism with the brother. So I think with Cameron, he may have gotten a mix, and as we start to see him really mature into his frame, we may see quickness kind of align itself with that strength that's in the body. And if the arm becomes a little bit more whippy, you could see the fastball grow. So he'll be an interesting follow. One more arm, and then to discuss as a high riser, somebody from your neck of the woods, Tyler Goodson. Was at Maiden High School, committed to Liberty. He may be at a different high school now.
He is at a different high school.
He is?
North Lincoln last year.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So he was a different high school last year. But we jumped Tyler from 62 to 19. What did we see out of Tyler? A Liberty commit that was a Campbell commit, and then when their pitching coach went to Liberty, he kind of reopened up his commitment and then followed his pitching coach commitment, at least, to Liberty. But what did we see out of Tyler that allowed for him to take that significant jump in our rankings?
Larger frame kid. He's always shown some arm strength, and made a jump this year. He was really good at state games, getting up into the 90s, and had a good summer. And his secondary stuff started to develop, and I think he's a guy that the scouts will see and see if he continues to jump a little bit and add some polish to his pitchability and secondary stuff.
Yeah, with the arms that are in our top 20, and it's just I don't want to put any one player on blast, but one of the things that we're having to deal with, one of the things that we're constantly reviewing now is where guys are injury wise, and then what does that do to our rankings? So Drake Purvis misses most of last year. We kind of kept him in that top 10, and all of a sudden he was back and throwing the ball very well. This summer. We talked about Bagwell. He had some arm issues. Drew Downs is an outfielder who had gotten hurt. James Nesta, it's a little different. I don't think his is an injury issue as much as his is he's a dual sport guy, an Oklahoma commit for baseball and football, and probably football first. It would be my guess. But watching what he's gone through with his transition, when you have some of these guys, why aren't we making big moves with them in the rankings when they're hurt, or when we see a slight tick down, if that makes sense?
I mean, there's still amateurs. Uh, there's going to be ups and downs throughout their career, and you never know. From what we do, how much they're doing behind the scenes. Are they trying a new training program? Are they in the weight room or not? And um, you try not to punish guys over a bad season in their careers when you've seen them do something good in the past. And with some injuries, you talked about Purvis and some of those guys. When you've seen them good and they're athletic, then you know they have an opportunity to bounce back. And Jet Music's going to be in there. He's battled some injuries, and
Yep.
he's so athletic that you keeps your hopes high from him coming back from injury and showing improvement. And it's a process, and we try our best to be patient with those guys and not make any rash decisions on guys we get to see fairly regular.
And I think again it goes to the aspect of the rankings list is kind of a living document. It's constantly moving. It's constantly adjusting. We have the pleasure because of the way you do the database. We can see all the way back to how far back can we go? We can go back a long ways. 2021 with the rankings. You know, August of 21. We can see where some of these guys were, and guys like Anderson Nance, he's been one or two. Perry Hargett, we initially had at 39 when the list was probably just 50. And then all of a sudden he makes a big jump in the next year and he's at 6.331 in our last, four. And it's, some of that is guys get better. A lot of that is we see them more, we get more familiar with them. So when we talk about a guy that's had some injury issues, there can be different ways we talk about them. With a Drake Purvis or a Jet Music, those are two guys that we're pretty familiar with. We have some history with those guys. We've seen those guys for a long time. So missing 6 months, not that big a deal to us. But if it's a guy, and I'm just picking a name out, BJ Brown, I don't think has had any injury issues, but he's a guy that we didn't know very well. We knew he was really athletic. We knew he was a high-end football talent, but we really got our first taste of BJ Brown at state games. And so, he was a guy that was in the 120s and 140s as of a year ago. And then as we see him in high school, bam, we jump him up. As we see him at state games, now he's in the top 50. So that living document aspect of, this isn't finished. This is kind of where they're at now. But if we were to redo this next week and we saw some events, it may change. I know it's going to change in the next 3 months because we're going to have fall events and fall games and some other big time events that we're going to go see. And then definitely by the time we get to the high school season, this list is going to be completely changed up. While a lot of it may look the same, even if guys are slotted the same, our opinion of them may be stronger or lighter or more or less.
Yeah, and I think we talk to people all the time, and a lot of times we get names early on, and it sounds like a guy that needs to be in there. And one thing I try to do is when you get those names, they're a prospect, is don't put them in too high. I'd rather them work, us see them and make the big jump up the board than trust somebody's opinion or somebody that saw them one time on the best day of their life, and all of a sudden you get them in there and then they got to take huge falls throughout the rankings. And I'd rather guys have to make big jumps up the board than make big falls down.
And that's a really good point in terms of how we build this list, because I do think even within our company, as guys are building out their list, especially at the earlier age groups, there's some different philosophies on that. You know, do we want to highlight a name? Do we want to have that high riser out of nowhere that we really don't know a lot about, but man, we saw him great once, boom, he's a top 5 guy, and then we learn he's not, and now we got to slide him out of there quietly. Maybe we're not writing stories about how we're sliding him out, but versus the seeing him and getting a little bit more comfortable with him and trying to grade him up that way. So, and I think from our end too, we're not necessarily in a hurry to put a final grade on a guy. We can think through this list, and I'm going to give you a second to kind of look through the list. For a guy that maybe we saw early on as a freshman or sophomore, that maybe we put it in, and you're not, the listeners may not know what the grades are, but maybe we put a 7 on him, and now we look back up and he's gotten stronger. He's an 8.3. There's one in the 25 class I know we were light on prior to future games last year. And then after future, I was light on. You pegged him earlier than I did. But we saw him as an 8th grader, and we impede him because he wasn't a prospect at the time because he weighed 95 pounds. But then 3 years later, he's a top 5 prospect in that class. Is there anybody that kind of comes to mind in this class where you're looking at him going, man, that guy's done. That guy's he's continued to get better, and we continue to move him up the board throughout the course of the last, year to 2 years?
Andrew Wallen for me.
Yep.
Building the class, heard the name, saw him throw somewhere in a short stint, and you saw the body and some arm strength there, but it wasn't very polished. And you think he's a guy that he needs to be ranked. He could be a Division I prospect, but not enough history to get him in the top 50 there or whatever. And I think I had him somewhere between you know 90 to 120. And then all of a sudden he see him more, and I think he was at an all-state event, and you kept hearing his name more and more, and he makes a big jump up. So I think you'd rather be a little more careful with guys on the front end and let them make the jump, and maybe even you know look wrong or bad on the front end than on the back end when you got to drop a guy 100 spots.
Well, he was an interesting guy for the pro scouts too, because we were early on him compared to them, whereas in our own estimation we were probably a little light on him early. And then we kind of moved him up, and then pro scouts, he's throwing the ball well. J.H. Rose, word's kind of getting out. But the number one question I got from guys was, is he a pitcher? Is he a hitter? Because he was putting up good numbers as a hitter at J.H. Rose. And, we give our opinion on that. But I urge the pro scouts I talked to, I said, I think he's this, but go in there with open eyes. I mean, it's a lanky body, and maybe he can hit. Maybe I've seen him 2 or 3 times. And so I have my opinion, but I haven't closed the door on it yet either. Another guy for me that comes up, and again, you're going to laugh because it's one of my personal favorites. It's kind of my cheesy favorite on this list is Walker McDuffie. We saw Walker in August of 2021, and we put him kind of towards the bottom. I think that list was at 75. We had him at 54. And again, that's still a pretty good grade. That we're only ranking 75, but we're probably only ranking guys we have Division I grades on at that point. So he's at 54. We see him again. We see him in a bullpen. It's loose. We see him again at last year's state games, and he gets into some issues and some troubles. He doesn't panic. He throws a ton of strikes. A slider's a weapon. We take him to future games. He's just dominant in 2 innings there. We had a chance to be around him. Nothing phases the kid. He commits to Chapel Hill, and we're looking at him right now at 18. But you and I are also having a conversation of, if he goes to Chapel Hill and for 3 years he's their stopper, he's their first guy out of the bullpen, and it's 89 to 94 with that slider, he may turn himself into a top 3 round guy. And are we light at 18? And how much projection do we want to put on that guy? And does that move him further up the board? I think we have to play with that a little bit in terms of where they're at now versus where we think they're going to be in the future, and what actual projection is versus hoping is. We're hoping he really dials this stuff in at Chapel Hill and does what we think he has a chance to do. But I think when you're grading out pure fastball, it's going to be tough to put a 60 on his fastball in the future. The slot doesn't allow for it maybe, but the movement and the way it plays, it may play like a 60. And so that, but that's going to be more of a deal of, is he getting ACC hitters out with his fastball? That allows you to put a 60 on the fastball effectiveness when the grade on the fastball is actually just a 50, if that makes sense. Um, and you knew we weren't going to get through a 2024 ranking without me talking about Walker. So
It's hard not to love the kid, and
I'm going to scroll through the list. I know we saw Christopher Donaldson at our border battle. He was been at green level. I think he's at Pro 5 now. A physical, broad-shouldered right-hander, and the fastball's jumped. And the command it's effective command right now. It's more control of he's throwing strikes. He's not really throwing to spots. But I think a lot of that's because he's gone from being 84, 86, 87 to being 88, 92. And the breaking ball is starting to come along with it. So I think he's an interesting follow, being at Pro 5, what they've done with development, and kind of watching, how he continues to develop. Let's talk about some of the hitters. And I know your guys at Western Carolina have been fairly active here lately, getting some commitments with Jackson Godfrey, Caden Haywood out of Hickory Ridge, John Lobbs out of Reagan, and not just Western Carolina, but where are you seeing some commitments and some guys that are maybe they're committing to schools that are great fits that are going to allow their grade to kind of play up? Is there anybody on this list where you're looking at him going, that dude really fits with that school? And I think over the course of time, our ranking is going to end up being light because that guy has gotten so much better. That type of guy has gotten so much better at that type of school.
yeah, I think mention those Western Carolina guys, and Coach Beck's being back there, and I thought from when he was there before to Georgia Southern to now, he does a great job of he'll take a guy with the raw power, but maybe lacks a little bit of the hit tool currently. And then he'll take the guy that's got the hit tool and, some gap power and, maybe he's a little light defensively. And he just always seems to do a good job of mixing those guys in a class. And then, they get there and you look up and they're, their sophomore year, they're playing every day and putting up numbers, and their deficiency has really improved.
Yeah, one of the schools that stood out for me was UNC Asheville too. And that staff has they've been working for a number of years. This isn't a fluke where the program's kind of ticking up, and they're fighting the portal. They've done a good job developing some guys that have then left. But when we look at this list, I think they've made a decision where they may be able to go get some high school guys that maybe weren't available in years past. But with everybody spending time in the portal, they're hammering some of these guys in North Carolina. Jake Pereira. I think Jake's a really interesting get for them because he's athletic, he's got strength, but I think his gameplay outplays his tools. And so I think he has a chance to outplay maybe what his grade is over the course of 3 years because he's such a good player. Logan Lowe, guy that was at our top prospect games last year, I think he was at our border battle this year. Just a quick twitch, fiery, high level, high energy player who's got a chance to play at a faster pace than a lot of the guys on any roster that he's on. I thought that was a tremendous pickup. Blaze Johnson is a catcher that you and I have both loved for 3 years. High level hit tool. And so watching, how schools are kind of attacking, not necessarily our rankings list and going through that, but how they're attacking this transfer portal era, and what are they doing? Are they sitting back and waiting for the portal and spending a ton of time in that, or are they maybe taking advantage of what may be not normally left on the board as we're going through this 24 class?
Yeah, and one thing we touched on a little bit earlier, but you see some of these guys we have ranked up there pretty good that aren't committed. This class has several uncommitted catchers uh,
Yeah,
that have shown well. That I think depending on how things shake out when fall practice gets going and some other things, you may see go off the board pretty quick. And then there's a lot of infielders that we've seen well that I think without the portal may be off the board, and I think you'll see them go go at some point when teams figure out their fall roster a little better, and what their team is going to look like uh, a year down the road.
So with rankings week, Matt, run me through what we got coming up. Today is Wednesday as we tape this. I'm going to try and get this out tonight or tomorrow, so maybe Thursday before the podcast drops. But Wednesday, what are we looking to get to with our rankings in the 2024 class? Have you set kind of a number on the back end that we're cutting it off at?
We'll be somewhere in the 275 to 300 range
Okay.
when it's all done, and that'll go out on Wednesday. And as usual, there'll be stories to follow, highlighting several new guys jumped into the class, and then several guys made some big jumps up the board too.
Yeah, and on the back end of that, I'm going to take the rankings from Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and kind of do some Mid-Atlantic projection list. Pro follows, guys to name, kind of setting up infielders in different areas that have similar grades on them, kind of compare and contrast what's in the different areas. So as we start rolling towards the Major League Draft, some of the names will be popping up, not only in our state, but in our region, guys will have some familiarity with. And then Friday, the national list drops. So the national list will be updated. It's being updated right now, but that national list will drop on Friday. Big story to come all that. We'll see how many North Carolina guys are in the national rankings, where they're going to be listed at. I would bet Shooter's probably trying to get to the top 500. That would be my guess. I know it's a lot of names he's going through, and it's an interesting class because in North Carolina, I don't think the class is down. I think the class is middle heavy. I think there's a ton more high level D1 guys on the list, or just D1 type commitments on the list than maybe we've had in years past, but we don't have the first round follow. We don't have 5 top 3 round follows. Somebody may jump in there. We could see obviously Perry. We talked about Perry. We talked about Anderson. We talked about Truitt. Caden Morris is another guy. It's just that physical size, and does the arm strength continue to develop? And there's some guys that could jump in. It's still early, but that's where this class is missing. And so when we see the national rankings, I think it'll be reflected in that a little. And then we'll roll into next week. We'll kind of polish off the 24s, and then we do it again with the 25s on Wednesday. Those coming out there then as well, right?
Yeah, we might need 2 shows for that 25 class. Talked about before. It's a loaded class on a national level here in North Carolina with that class.
It is. So and I think like the 24s, it's middle heavy too. It's got a ton of depth, but the top end of that class may be one of the best classes in North Carolina's history. So we're going to get into all of that, but make sure you're going to prepbaseballreport.com throughout this week, checking on all the rankings from all the states, all the areas across the country, dropping on Wednesday, and then Friday, the national rankings. If you're liking this podcast, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Follow along. We've got some things that will come out throughout the week with some shorts based on what we've seen here. There'll be some clips of some players and things like that. So we're constantly trying to update and roll out more information. And then we'll be back next week, obviously, to talk about the 25 release, the following week, the 26 release. And Matt's going to be in his dungeon kind of typing away and working on those things. So we'll wake him up and get him out on Wednesday of next week to kind of get him in some sunlight, be able to do this podcast again. For Matt Payne, I'm Brandon Hall. This is the Prep Baseball Report of North Carolina podcast, and we'll see you at the